Não. Well, so you have to switch chairs whenever you have to present, okay? Because we cannot move.
Or if anybody wants to speak, one, you just tell me.
I have a lot of songs.
So this will be down.
Sì, no, it's okay. The avanti.
If you don't know, we will there because I need to do my presentation. Okay, thank you.
Just gonna, I think we all.
Yeah. Otherwise, that will be lost.
Otherwise, you like every other time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No, I already have a few.
Welcome to the first plenary session of our symposium. I'd like to start by thanking to the scientific coordinator of the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies, Professor Giselle Martins, for being the heart and soul of this international symposium, Interdisciplining Knowledge. In our first plenary session on the topic of interdisciplinary research humanities, I've been trying to practice this word. It is a pleasure having you with us. Joanna Page, Professor of Latin American Studies and the Director of Center for Arts, Social Science and Humanities at University of Cambridge. Vitor Neves, Professor at the Faculty of Economics of University of Coimbra and researcher at the Center for Social Studies in Coimbra. Tanya Augsburg, Humanities trained interdisciplinary feminist performance calling, art writer, curator, and teacher in the areas of creative arts and humanities. And last but not least, João Macedo Teixeira, scientific vice coordinator of our center and researcher within the School of Culture, History and Language at the Australian National University. We thank you all for accepting this challenge. Last Sunday, the Portuguese philosopher José Gil, in an essay entitled Artificial Intelligence Will Be Simpler and Smaller, Poorer and Happier, published in Publicum, highlights chaos as a source of creative singularity, understood as vast and bringing life to creation. And I quote, "It remains to be seen how infinity chaos imprints the mark of this singularity on the creation. Singularity should not be confused with the uniqueness of the person or the self as a private inner instance. Rather, singularity refers not only to the being, but to the thing, a sound, a color, an atmosphere, time of day, or a work of art. End of quote. The singularity of your research comes from its ability to connect, combine, and interact with other interests and singularities. We are eager to hear about the scope of your current research, as well as your reflections on contrasting disciplinary configurations. So we will start with Joan Page with a presentation on from interdisciplinarity to research innovation.
Bom dia, obrigada José pelo convite, muito obrigada também ao comitê organizador pela sua ajuda, é realmente prazer estar com vocês hoje. As the introduction said, I'm a professor of Latin American Studies. My work has been very interdisciplinary over the years. I'm particularly interested in, do I need the mic?
Oh,
Yes. Particularly interested in, just realised the Zoom people. Particularly interested in the relationship between science and culture and the arts, and particularly in post-colonial and specifically Latin American context. I'm not actually going to talk about my own research in this presentation, but I'm going to use this time as an opportunity to talk through some of the new strategic directions that we're taking at CRASH, which is an interdisciplinary research centre based at the University of Cambridge. And I'm going to do so in a way that I hope will invite dialogue and possibly even critique. I'm sure that many of you in the room have had more experience in leading the kinds of initiative that we're developing, and I'd be very grateful for your feedback and to hear about your own experiences. So in the interest of time, I'm going to talk less about the intellectual framing of our new strategies and more about some of the practical opportunities and challenges that we're facing. But I will note from the start that a lot of the thinking behind this has emerged from scholarship on the decolonisation of knowledge, but also on inclusive research more generally, responding to the task of connecting academic knowledge with the kinds of knowledge and practice that have been undervalued and marginalised due to the hegemony of certain approaches in Western academia, really since the Enlightenment, but particularly since the consolidation of disciplines in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Inclusive knowledge, as we know, doesn't just mean ensuring diversity in our communities of scholars. It also means creating the possibility for different ways of thinking, analysing, theorising, interpreting, and evaluating in research. It means a critique of the knowledge systems that we have at present, but also an opening up to alternative forms of knowledge. And the third interest here is in exploring the possibilities for collaboration in the humanities, where there's been much less of a tradition of working collaboratively than in the sciences or social sciences. First, just a few words about CRASH to give you a sense of the broader context. As I said, we're a university-based research centre for the arts, humanities and social sciences, although we do occasionally, and I'm hoping that we're going to do more in the future, reach into the sciences. We operate three main programmes. First, we host individual and collective research projects that come with external funds, either from national or international funding bodies, or increasingly from philanthropic gifts. So the researchers that are based with us may already be employed by the university, but more often they're on short-term research contracts that last for the duration of the funded project. Second, we run several visiting fellowship schemes. Most of these are funded by our visitors, but we've introduced recently a fully funded visiting fellowship programme for scholars from the Global South. And we also buy out early career scholars from their teaching in the university so that they can spend an additional term's research leave with us. And our third purpose is to run an extensive events programme. So this includes workshops, seminars, conferences, research networks, and they come to about a total of 300 events a year. And so Crash was founded in 2001 with the primary aim of connecting up researchers across the arts, humanities and social sciences in a university that is very decentralized and very fragmented. It was given the role of promoting interdisciplinary research, and this is absolutely foundational to our programs. So, for example, all the research networks we support must be led by co-conveners from at least 2 different disciplines. This is an important focus that we're not planning to abandon, but the boundaries between disciplines are not the only ones that need to be crossed. If we're really committed to colonizing knowledge, then one of the crucial tasks I think that the Academy faces is to consider how we might connect, or perhaps more properly in some cases reconnect, academic research with other forms of knowledge production. Some of which, as I've said, have been consistently devalued in European and Anglophone scholarship. So to broaden participation in the production of knowledge, we need to think about how to forge links with communities and organisations outside of universities in a deeper and more collaborative way. Interdisciplinarity, I think, is an important conversation the Academy needs to maintain and deepen with itself in order to challenge the norms of scholarship and to find better ways of approaching questions and problems. But there are also really important conversations that we need to deepen with interlocutors outside of the Academy, which will also challenge what we understand by research and the different forms it can take. So at Crash, we decided to expand our focus on interdisciplinarity to include other creative or disruptive practices that cross the boundaries that separate the Academy from other worlds. For want of a better name, and it's not a great name, we're calling this research innovation. Research innovation could, of course, mean anything. All research is supposed to be innovative. We have defined it in quite precise ways. So our aim is to support and promote research that crosses disciplinary boundaries that are particularly entrenched. So we're thinking here now, and very relevantly, Georgina was commenting on this, between humanities and the sciences. Research that breaks new ground in its methods of inquiry or modes of communication. Research that creates new partnerships, new forms of participation, reaches new publics. Research that explores the relationship between academic and creative or artistic practices. And finally, research that promotes and creates inclusive forms of collaboration with scholars from the Global South and with other regions and communities that are underrepresented in Cambridge. So these have become our selection criteria for really all of the programs that we run. And we're looking to support researchers who are exploring very different ways of working together and communicating with each other. In our events, for example, we're encouraging conveners to experiment with different formats beyond the traditional academic conference of panels made up of formal presentations and Q&As. When we meet together, might there be other ways in which we could exchange ideas and learn from each other? How could we not just talk and listen, but find ways to collaborate together or explore something, produce something? How can we involve other knowledge producers in those conversations and collaborations? How do we challenge a model in which universities produce knowledge and communicate it to the public, but instead think more expansively and inclusively about how knowledge is produced and who is producing it? We're soon going to be launching a new program that we're calling Research Labs. And the aim is to facilitate innovative practices of collaborative working within the arts, social sciences, and humanities, both within and beyond the university. So each research lab will bring together researchers from at least 2 disciplines, with at least one non-academic partner to work creatively and collaboratively on joint initiatives. Firstly, over a period of 2 years, but that will be renewable. Some research labs will also involve researchers in the life sciences, medicine, technology, or engineering. So the idea is that research labs will provide opportunities for people to explore new ways of working together or ways of working with new partners. They will be centered on one or more research questions. These could be broader or could be more specific, but they're designed to invite participation from a wide range of scholars and people working beyond the academy. So I've been asked why the name, why research labs? Is this, why are you borrowing a term from the sciences? Is this a form of appropriation? Or worse, is this the evidence of some kind of subjugation of the humanities to scientific practices? That certainly isn't the intention here. The root meaning of laboratory is simply a place of work. And it's a term that's being used in a narrow sense to refer to a science lab and to a place reserved for experts. So in broadening the reach of this term, we're aligning with a movement that includes open labs, fab labs, make spaces, hacker spaces, where people work collaboratively, sharing resources to create something or to solve problems. A laboratory provides a set of conditions that are conducive to experimentation, and that's exactly what we aim to do. These will be spaces for curiosity-driven exploration, particularly with the ways in which we traditionally do research or communicate it. So our research labs will be led by teams of senior and junior scholars. The non-academic partner that they will collaborate with could be a school, a policy unit, a company, a charity, an artist collective, a hospital, a museum, or really anything else. We don't want to define in advance the work that they're going to do. But we are looking for proposals that are genuinely innovative and the kind of collaborations that they're seeking. We're also wanting to support work that is highly speculative in the sense that it might not, at least initially, lead to measurable outputs. And so one of the things that we've been talking about at Crash is how are we going to evaluate the success of this work, particularly if it doesn't result in conventional outcomes, such as publications. So we've been talking about the importance of allowing programs to fail, because the kind of ambitious and adventurous projects that we want to support carry a much higher risk of failure. We don't, at least in the UK, working in an academic environment where taking risks is often rewarded. So we're planning to work with research labs to define with them how they're going to be evaluated, how we're going to decide what success means in relation to their objective. As a way of inviting critique and debate, I'm going to mention some other questions that we're asking ourselves about this new direction. The first question is one that makes me personally somewhat uncomfortable. If this strategy of research innovation in the way that I've been describing it primarily comes from an ethical impetus that has to do with inclusion and diversity, a belief that we shouldn't reserve only for traditional academic institutions the role of producing knowledge, I have to recognise that it also overlaps with the neoliberal turn in research funding in the UK. So there, an emphasis on impact-driven research is driving a lot of national funding. If you carry out research in the arts, for example, you're much more likely to be funded if you can show that your projects are going to bring benefits to the creative economy in the UK. And there are particular opportunities in areas where research crosses over into working with museum collections, for example, or design companies. And so these are very similar logics, really, to the ones of accountability and innovation that Georgina was talking about earlier in relation to interdisciplinarity. And so the drive to broaden participation in knowledge overlaps quite uneasily, really, then, with these government directives that value universities most for their measurable contribution to the national economy. Perhaps we should simply be pragmatic about this. After all, part of our role at Crash is to facilitate research. That includes equipping researchers with the ability to navigate the funding landscape that they currently find themselves in. And as I was reminded at a university senior leadership training event yesterday, leadership is all about adapting to changing environments. But this is something that I very much value your views on. Another question is the extent to which we should seek to preserve what is distinctive about academic research, whether there's a risk here of undermining the value of scholarship, or on the other hand, of excluding research that is more traditional in its modes of inquiry. Are there some forms of research that cannot or should not be pursued through collaboration? How do we create space for research into subjects in which there is little or no interest outside the academy? So these are all questions that I would love if there is time for us to discuss later on, particularly those of you who have more experience already in initiating programs of these kinds at your own institutions or being involved in them. If we get this right, my hope is that it won't diminish what's unique and important about academic research, but it will help to create a more inclusive academy that learns from other practices in order to redefine and renew its own, and that deepens particularly its understanding of the importance of collaboration. Thank you.
Now we are going to listen to Victor Neves and crossing boundaries, science, and open system. Desculpa, Marlene está por aí, que eu não sei onde se colocou. Eu julgo que está no desktop, mas... Não. Não. Está aqui. Está aqui. Tá, desculpa.
Good morning. Let me start by thanking the Center for Interdisciplining Studies for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be here and having the opportunity to share my views with all of you. I'm going to present to you a view which is, or a perspective that is somewhat unusual in interdisciplinary studies, because I look to disciplines, to individual sciences from an interdisciplinary perspective.
No.
You need specialized knowledge.
Oh, we got it. Estamos entrando no só.
Okay. Some years ago, I came across a proposition that I found very interesting and challenging for all those willing to pursue an interdisciplinary agenda, like myself. And the statement is boundaries of the mind and habit are more difficult to tear down than the boundaries between states. And I find all the time those boundaries of the mind. And so I decided that much of my work on interdisciplinarity had to do with the challenge of facing these boundaries of the mind. And my starting point is this one. In the beginning, we have disciplines. That is, in my view, discussing interdisciplinarity entails a reflection on disciplines themselves. We have to look to how disciplines are organized, about the nature of their subjects, their methods, on the isolations and connections that can and should be built. I have here a list of my previous works on this topic, and I share the views that some colleagues in economics have put into a book called Open Economics, Economics in Relation to Other Disciplines. Let me, first of all, make a clarifying note on the meaning of interdisciplinarity, because we have lots of different meanings. Interdisciplinarity can be considered from many perspectives. There are multiple interdisciplinarities. So I must say, how I use this word, this concept of interdisciplinarity. I follow Olga Pombo, and I use interdisciplinarity as an umbrella term, meaning a continuum of progressive integration of disciplines, going from the less demanding forms of disciplinary exchange, I call this pluri or multidisciplinarity, to the complete integration of knowledge with a new set of common denominator concepts, transcending original disciplines, and I call this transdisciplinarity. So when I talk about interdisciplinarity, I take this as covering all those dimensions of interdisciplinarity. So my first idea is that interdisciplinary isolations are unavoidable. We start by the need to close our minds to many possibilities, at least temporarily, in order to pay attention to a few. We have always to put some connections outside of our observation. We have to assume that they are somehow absent or inoperative. In spite of the ultimate interconnectedness of things that we know, there is an ontology of open systems in the world, but we need to decompose our object of study to make it manageable and to generate knowledge. So we need disciplines. Brian Losby said in a very interesting way, because different people can develop different skills, a knowledge-rich society must be an ecology of specialists. Knowledge is distributed, and being distributed, it can grow, provided that it is sufficiently coordinated to support increasing interdependencies. But the fact is that sciences are open systems. That is, science should be conceived as structures of ideas and institutions that are interlinked by a network of connections forming more or less coherent wholes, which are to a greater or lesser extent related to the exterior in some way, affecting other systems and or being affected by them. My approach to interdisciplinarity is thus what I've been calling an open system approach to interdisciplinarity. That is, against the dualist view of science in terms of unity, disunity, of ever more specialized, fragmentary sciences opposed to reductionist projects of unification. I endorse this view of science as theoretical open systems. That is, this involves a multi-directional dynamics of interaction of relatively autonomous disciplines and what I call a utopian search for totality and unity in diversity. And here we have lots of different possibilities. I quote again Brian Lowesby, an economist, who says, since our representations are always incomplete, innovation is always possible. We can change the set of elements, revise the internal linkages between them, or find the external connections, whether contemplating artifacts, process structures, sequences, problems, or strategies. We are operating in a large combinatorial spaces in which there are, in principle, many options for change. In fact, in this view that I subscribe, an open system to knowledge, approach to knowledge, will have deep implications on how disciplines are understood and developed. The boundaries of a given science, in my case, economics, with the external environment, the other sciences, if they exist, have to be thought of as fluid and permeable. An open system is clearly not a perfectly circumscribed domain. Disciplines and their frontiers are always and must be always conceived as provisional. And this leads me again to the idea of boundaries and the obstacles to interdisciplinarity. It has already been mentioned here today that crossing boundaries faces significant institutional and cognitive barriers, namely those that follow from various disciplinary cultures, worldviews, ways of thinking, and paradigms. Disciplines, in particular, the social sciences, are crisscrossed with internal conflicts, which implies that interdisciplinary dialogue is frequently an effort, not only of going across disciplines, always a difficult task, but of inter-paradigmatic intersection. The concept of discipline is actually insufficient for how we analyze interdisciplinarity, because many times we tend to look at the relationship between disciplines if they were homogeneous, and they are not homogeneous. We have conflicting paradigms within each science, so we have to look to interdisciplinary exchange from the perspective of sciences as plural entities. And there are many reported difficulties experienced in exchanges, for example, with economists, that arise as a result of these conflicting paradigmatic crossovers, namely concerning foundational beliefs and assumptions, including those relating to different worldviews, modes of thought, rules and standards for scientific practice or methodology. That is, different academic cultures and values, and differences in language and in the meaning of the concepts and data used should be taken into consideration. This has an important implication, which is constructive interdisciplinary dialogue may become impossible. Many times, crucial ontological, conceptual, and methodological differences separating conflicting views about the way the world works and how to investigate it significantly hinder the possibilities of cross-fertilization and constructive exchanges among disciplines. Many of the difficulties that interdisciplinary endeavors usually encounter very often have to do with contradictory exchanges that lead to total unproductive or even worse, illogical, inconsistent results. In one of my last papers, I dealt with the consideration, for example, of the concept of uncertainty. And many times we have people from different disciplines working with incompatible concepts like uncertainty. Most of the uses of the concept of uncertainty in economics is incompatible with the same concept used in other social sciences. So if we want to overcome this problem, we have to look, in my view, to a search for integrating concepts and common interpretative frameworks. This is a precondition for interdisciplinary exchange. But if, as one author noted, our understanding of complex systems is necessarily based on multiple incongruent ways of knowing, some form of constructive interparadigmatic pluralism is needed. Otherwise, we will become closed in only similar views. So this raises a new challenge for the work in order to pursue an interdisciplinary agenda, which is where are the limits to pluralism? And when I ask this, I'm raising a new discussion, which is the discussion on interdisciplinarity becomes a discussion on pluralism in the context of science. With all these obstacles that we have to face, I came to what expresses particularly well my view on interdisciplinarity, which is the famous words of Eduardo Galeani saying, utopia is on the horizon. I get 2 steps closer and it moves 2 steps away. I walk 10 steps and it is 10 steps further away. No matter how much I walk, it will never be reached. So what is utopia for? For this it serves to walk. Thank you.
So the next embrace the multiplicities from feminist art to speak terms, this course of interdisciplinarity will be presented by Daniel Austin.
Okay. First, I have to mention that the title is completely wrong. No. It's my fault because when I was asked, when invited, the dual function to reflect on your current research the title kind of reflects my current research, but I got carried away with the reflection. So I think today is mostly on reflection, and Georgina, you would be very happy to know that AI told me about the design of my slides in Microsoft. So all this, and I thought that was very strange that that would be the title slide, but they were convinced, Microsoft AI, that that's the way I should go. But then I made the boxes, so I think the color changes were mine mostly. And yeah, I had really 3 trajectories in my research. So this is why I was asking Jose questions, because I do work on the interdisciplinary arts, but I'm really grounded in feminist performance and contemporary art. And along the way, I've established expertise on interdisciplinarity and interdisciplinary discourse, and also transdisciplinarity. So it's always interesting when I'm asked to talk about my research. It's like, what do you want me to talk about? So I will go with there. And I want to thank all of you for the invitation, because not only is it a wonderful opportunity, but it's a wonderful challenge, because you basically invited me to return to my 2017 overview text on the interdisciplinary arts that was published in the 2nd edition of the Oxford Handbook of Interdisciplinarity. But I've always had this thought that I have to somehow collect my almost 30 years of art writing. And so even though I would say that text is the first chapter, what I'm doing now is the 2nd chapter. Okay, so I will begin now. What are the interdisciplinary arts? What are the relationships between the interdisciplinary arts and humanities? What are the links between the interdisciplinary arts practice, interdisciplinary research, and interdisciplinary knowledge? How can the interdisciplinary arts advance cognition and knowledge in general? These are questions that have concerned me for over 30 years as I have endeavored to understand how artists, particularly those who identify as interdisciplinary artists, and how do I do this? Which one? Okay, all right. Good. Which one? Which one? Okay. Okay. How interdisciplinary artists research, represent, articulate, and critique emergent social phenomena and cultural practices. The interdisciplinary arts have yet to receive their fair share of attention within the existing literature on interdisciplinarity, even as interrelations between the arts have become increasingly commonplace. In 2008, David Trichetto et al. Pointed out, quote, previous research on interdisciplinarity between the arts have been strangely piecemeal, especially when one considers the abundance of recent scholarly writing devoted to the challenges and possibilities of academic interdisciplinarity. Rather than piecemeal, I would assert instead that the scholarship on the interdisciplinary arts have been advanced largely through individual case studies of specific artists or overviews of specific historical art currents, trends, or movements. In 2015, when I wrote the text Interdisciplinary Arts, authoritative definition not much has changed hence, although I am encouraged to learn of Georgina Blunt's work. As historians of multimedia, Randall Parker and Kendall Jordan concede, definitions are confining. Artists who value artistic freedom and originality have been known to resist participating in normative discourse that definitions often serve to establish. Tactics of resistance can include downright refusals, but they can also entail deferrals from answering the question, what are the interdisciplinary arts, by highlighting the lack of canonical definitions. I highlighted 2 definitions of the interdisciplinary arts in my 2000, and this is kind of, when we're talking about disciplinarity in the arts, this is what generally understood as what disciplinary in the arts mean. Artistic purity, autonomy, medium, specificity. All right, I highlighted two definitions of the interdisciplinary arts in my 2017 text that are worth repeating here. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to read it, but you can see the two. One is by James W. Davis, who was my former colleague at San Francisco State. And the other one was Interdisciplinary Arts Program at Arizona State West. Their former website, I had taught that program when I taught at ASU. And I think they raise the question, what are the defining features of the interdisciplinary arts? Many people think it's integration, but I would say that both definitions emphasize integration not only of art forms, disciplines, mediums, or media, but also the synthesis of ideas and artistic practice in the study and production of interdisciplinary artworks. More specifically, both definitions suggest that the interdisciplinary arts involve more than the synthesis and integration of art media, medium, and disciplines. In other words, the interdisciplinary arts are reflective of and characterized by their interrelations with academic disciplines, fields, and discourses within and outside the realm of art. At their core, the interdisciplinary arts exemplify what has been termed as either a wide or broad form of interdisciplinarity. And that's what I wrote in 2015, published in 2017. I am now thinking more, rather than broad interdisciplinarity, maybe more what is becoming more increasingly a common understanding of transdisciplinarity, which I will not go into today, but this is a conference on interdisciplinarity. Nevertheless, their broadness suggests additional qualities. Broad interdisciplinarity connotes inclusivity. Another integral feature of interdisciplinary arts. Inclusivity in turn implies openness to continuous change and innovation, outwardly and continually inclusive, expanding, evolving, and innovative. The interdisciplinary arts defy attempts at not only definition, but also periodization, categorization, comparison, theorization, and typologies. In other words, the established arsenal of concepts and methodologies and approaches that scholars have deployed to study and understand the arts, particularly in art history. Rather than aim for the definitive, scholars interested in studying and researching the interdisciplinary arts would do well to accept that they will never have the last word on the subject. It is perhaps more feasible to draw conclusions based on discerning patterns and themes from case studies and comparative studies. In the 2017 chapter, I identified 5 major integrative aspects highlighted in the existing literature on the interdisciplinary arts. And here are the 5. The one that is really the most instructive to me as kind of an art historian has been the historical avant-garde, with their attention on radical juxtaposition, i.e. collage and more. Rather than summarize the text more here, I will turn to discussing how my own investigations of the work of specific artists, case studies that at times have veered toward qualitative research, which is interesting because if you think of art history, is always looking at the past. You know, the joke in art history is the only good artist is a dead artist, right? So, so for my work, particularly 25 years ago, you know, working with living artists, that was considered quite unusual, right? And just going back to the historical avant-garde, if you think about integrative aspects, when I talk about radical juxtaposition, you think of the invention of performance art. Here's Hugo Ball, you know, wearing a combination of lobster claws and a priest's outfit, the hat, for example. The ready-mades, which I will discuss later, the idea of transfer, you know, transferring. But with Marcel Duchamp, he was really concerned with kind of reframing or transfer of objects or concepts. And then the idea of happenings and the concept of simultaneity. All right. Okay, so As I will attempt to delineate my own work, I will also highlight some relevant turning points in my research trajectory. For example, the first definition of interdisciplinarity I came across as an undergraduate was Roland Barthes. In order to, quote, in order to do interdisciplinary work, it is not enough to take a subject or a theme and to arrange 2 or 3 sciences around it. Interdisciplinary study consists of creating a new object which belongs to no one, end quote. This definition, which emphasizes formulating what has not yet been established or recognized, has been vital to my understanding my research aims in discerning and explicating the emergent in culture. As an undergraduate at New York University and denizen of downtown Manhattan during the punk and new wave eras of the mid-1980s, I sought to learn more about performance art and its links to theater and dramatic literature. For graduate study, I was interested in studying performance studies at a time when it was still very much an emergent field. In the United States, performance studies as an interdiscipline grew out of theater programs and communication programs through their interactions with anthropology. In continental Europe, performance studies developed mostly out of the study of art or philosophy. Because at the time, Emory University had no graduate program in either theater or art history, I pursued an interdisciplinary doctorate in the long-standing Graduate Institute of Liberal Arts, which unfortunately was discontinued in 2016, and maybe this afternoon is another victim of the politics of interdisciplinary studies. My academic research on the interdisciplinary arts originated with a single study that became a chapter in my dissertation as I sought to understand the cross-disciplinary performance art of the French artist Orlan, beginning in 1994 for my 1996 doctoral dissertation, Private Theaters on Stage, Hysteria and the Female Medical Subject from Baroque Theatricality to Contemporary Feminist Performance Art. I learned from Orlan 3 interdisciplinary art strategies that, 2 of which that, as far as I know, are not yet prominently featured in the academic literature in the interdisciplinary arts. The first, and the one that drew me to her work, was Orlan's reframing, particularly her 9 surgical performances, the reincarnation of Saint Orlan from 1990 to 1993, that reframed cosmetic surgery as performance art. And here it's different than Duchamp's reframing of objects. She was reframing cultural practices, cosmetic surgery, as art, right? And in so doing, she called attention to the fact that these cultural practices, particularly cosmetic surgery, that we take for granted, you know, we really need to think about more carefully, right? This is before, in the early 1990s, before cosmetic surgery became commonplace on television, for example, right? When you didn't see it being televised. So it was considered quite taboo to show it. So, you know, she called attention to it, and in my essay on her, you know, I introduced the term medical performance, for example. The second, from which I learned from Orlan's writings, was her multidisciplinary approach to critiquing existing representations. Ooh, I think I'm behind. I don't know. I think I'm out of sorts here. Okay, maybe not. Here we go. Critiquing existing representations of women and cis female beauty by systematically investigating multiple discourses, such as representations of women in the history of art, in religion, and medical discourse. In 1998, Orlan's work would increasingly shift from carnal art, corporal modifications, to the virtual, expanding her inquiry to cross-cultural investigations of beauty by literally integrating her self-portraits with anthropological images from the Americas and Africa. Orlan explicitly referenced the cross-disciplinary arts technique identified in the technological arts, hybridization, by entitling her multiple series as self-hybridizations from 1998 to 2002. While Orlan has vehemently denied charges of cultural appropriation in these works, I have found it interesting that she has also facilitated public platforms and debates in which different perspectives and opinions of her work had been expressed and discussed without any resolution. I had hoped to show you images of it, but in my hotel, the internet wasn't working, so you should look it up. Her work is quite extraordinary in the fact that she, you know, mixes her face with Olmec pottery, paintings of Native Americans, which is really problematic, and her images of photographs of anthropological masks from Africa in the 1930s with her own face. All right, with Orland's 1994 self-hybridizations between series, and I could only download one here, we can note a third cross-disciplinary technique, layering, where images from various discourses, art history, medical documentation, and mythologies are not just juxtaposed, which suggests agency, adjacency, but actually layered on top of each other in multiples, to envision various digital and or virtual possibilities not yet possible in the actual flesh. For several years, I met and studied additional artists who foregrounded reframing as an interdisciplinary aesthetic strategy. In 1995, I met the artist duo Idea, aka Paula Moore and Melissa Wolf, who have reframed investigative journalism as art when they toured the United States to interview artists, museum professionals, politicians, religious personnel, and more about their thoughts on political censorship or the public defunding of the arts, eventually creating a documentary called the NEA Tapes and a video archive. Their project was to gather various viewpoints about public funding of the arts, present them, and to create resources for further research and policymaking and governance. The idea, I met the artist Sherry Rose, the widow of the late supermasochist poet and artist Bob Flanagan in 1999. Together, Rose and Flanagan reframed kink or sadomasochism, consensual play, as art. They reframed the museum into hospital rooms, raising awareness about disabilities such as cystic fibrosis by featuring artwork, writing, performance, video art, and installation by a disabled artist. In such reframing, they uncovered common ground between the discourse of art and eroticism, the element of play, and the performance of roles. In 2001, I met the Brazilian artist Eduardo Katz as he had a residency at Arizona State for his work, The Eighth Day. I began to become interested in transfer as an aesthetic strategy. In their article, Teaching to Transfer, Dean Perkins and Gabrielle Solomon describe a type of interdisciplinary thinking as transfer, which is the ability to transfer knowledge or skill learned in one context in order to enhance another. The authors distinguish between what they call low road transfer and high road transfer. And skills and knowledge obtained by learning and driving a car. In contrast, high road transfer depends on deliberate, mindful abstraction or skill of knowledge from one context or application in another. An example of high road transfer that the authors cite is a line from a Shakespearean sonnet: "Summer hath too short a lease." According to Perkins and Solomon, Shakespeare's genius lies in his ability to make the links between two seemingly incompatible discourses, those of meteorology and real estate. So we're not talking about the metaphor here. We're talking about the cognitive act behind it. Okay. The technique of time. Oh boy. Okay. So that's only two. So let me go to my conclusion. See, I got carried away. Okay, I doubt I will ever compile an exhaustive list. but I do hope to contribute to current understandings of the interdisciplinary arts from some of the case studies I've mentioned here today. My research on the interdisciplinary arts illustrates a limited utility of disciplinary boundaries and art categories. Even the simplest work of art does not divorce the society and culture in which it is produced. Thus, each work is shaped either intentionally or unintentionally on the part of the artist by numerous discourses surrounding or framing it. The challenge of thinking about how the interdisciplinary arts contributes to knowledge is similar to thinking about the interdisciplinary arts in general. You need to be willing to study multiple disciplinary discourses, methodologies, perspectives, and insights that often inform interdisciplinary artworks. And since one scholar cannot possibly study all of the interdisciplinary arts, scholars of the interdisciplinary arts need to come together as we are doing here, share their insights, read each other's scholarship, whether it is to write co-authored works or to publish essays in collected volumes or even websites. These are all ways
and when they sit down to
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking the organizing committee for the kind invitation, although I'm not sure if I should be thankful. As previous thoughts have sort of left this daunting feeling on me. I haven't thought about interdisciplinarity enough or at all. But I'll sort of give you a tour of a question that requires interdisciplinarity. So it's not a reflection about interdisciplinarity. It is a mode of doing, I guess, interdisciplinarity. And with the possibility of being wrong from the beginning, allow me to disagree with what Vitor said, that in the beginning there were disciplines. To me, in the beginning, there were questions. And then the way to answer those questions sort of forced us into disciplinary silos, if we will. And so today I'll talk about the question that sort of bothers me, gives me this intellectual itch. And so my way of approaching interdisciplinarity is an attempt to answer what I consider to be a complex question or a complex object of study. And what is that question? It's the origin of modern human populations. And I'm already in trouble. And it's something I've been discussing with Jose quite a lot. And that, Georgina alluded to before, is that it's not only difficult in interdisciplinarity or interdisciplinary approaches to understand the language of other disciplines. It's also sometimes very hard to understand the conceptions, how people conceptualize the world, how they approach those questions. And what I mean here, so words are important. For people in the humanities, words are important. In the natural sciences, it's not really always the case. So I can write something about the origin and you're thinking about an event when I actually mean a process or a series of events that, sort of are interlinked in a process. And that process is an evolutionary process. And modern human populations are present-day people. And when I mean the origin of modern humans, I mean, how does the biological diversity of people all over the world, how did it come to be? What is the process that drives that physically, right? We're not talking about material culture, at least yet. We're not talking about religion. We're not talking about art. We're talking about the biology of the people that inhabit it. And so to think about this question, of course, requires some abuses, some simplifications in the form of categorizations. And so this question was mostly addressed by a discipline that everybody knows, archaeology or paleoanthropology, where people looked at least two of the objects of study of the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies in Coimbra, the human and the artifact, directly. And they categorized those two objects in groups, and they started calling these categories different groups, different humans, sometimes different species. And of course, then the question is, how are these groups then related? The groups that lived in the past, that were present in the fossil record, how are they related to people living today? And so, of course, simplification on top of simplification, you can arrive at a map like this. Let's say this is a map of human groups, categorical human groups, fossil groups, that lived in this period, the Pleistocene. It's sort of an epoch that lasted between 2 million years until 10,000 years ago. And if you looked at, say, in this case, 125,000 years ago, if you had a time slice, you could look at the world, you could categorize humans in 3 different morphological groups. In Africa, you would see a group that resembles morphologically present-day people. We call this modern humans. They might have emerged at the continent around 300,000 years ago. In the Middle East and in Europe, we have another group who first appeared in the record around 500,000 years ago, and they're called the Neanderthals. I guess everybody is familiar with that. And then in Asia, there was another group who first appeared in the fossil record around 2 million years ago, and they're called Homo erectus. Homo erectus also appears in Africa around the same time. So the idea is, and all models agree with this, is that there was an origin of the Homo genus in Africa. Those groups of humans moved out, and they looked slightly different across different geographies. How are they related to us today is the question. So yeah, that was the slide that I should have asked this question. So the models, as I said, basically agree in the African origin, remote at least, of these different fossil groups. And then there's other models, but there's 3 different groups of models, let's call them like this. The candelabra hypothesis is really a racial theory about human origins that attests that these groups, the present-day people living in different geographies that have some sort of dissimilarities, morphological dissimilarities, whatever they are, however they are categorized, they descend from these earlier radiations, like maybe 2 million years ago, and they've evolved separately. They are almost different species. Then there's a multi-regional model here shown on the right, which shows that, well, human groups do descend to a certain extent to from these earlier migrations, and present-day people, present-day variation results from sort of the interactions, the mixing of these different groups across time. And then there's a third model, which says that the African humans that emerged, as I said, around 300,000 years ago, eventually went out a second time, and they replaced the pre-existing forms. So Homo erectus becomes extinct, Neanderthals becomes extinct, the modern humans take over. These hypotheses were all drawn from the archaeological record by looking at differences. And mind you, there's already a bias here. Right? It sort of pays off to look for differences, and you might be more likely to find differences if that's what you're looking for. So I'm just going to skip, for the interest of time, the details on these different models. And this was pretty much the lay of the land until very recent, transformation of the field that resulted from a fusion, if you will, of archaeology, biology, and biochemistry. This is a technical revolution that suddenly allowed people to extract genetic information from fossils. So now, instead of just looking at morphological differences between groups, we could suddenly directly ask whether those groups, if we were able to extract DNA from the fossils, if those groups have any relationship with present-day people. I'm not saying that they are therefore the same species. I'm not saying that they have the same culture. I'm just saying that they have biological relationships. And then, or we can at least ask that question. And then all these other discussions could start. And so when a group in Leipzig led by Svante Pabo was able to retrieve genetic information from Neanderthal fossils, what they found was something very surprising to some people and something very expected to other people, is that the Neanderthals of Europe were not necessarily extinct. They survived in each of us living outside of Africa, and to a certain extent, as a work shown after, also in Africa, because we draw at least 2% of our ancestry to this group. And 2% might seem too little, but that entails, if you actively go through the disciplinary nuances of this, it would entail that you have family groups that would coexist with one another to have these signatures being passed on across the generations. More so, this interdisciplinary discipline, if you will, has been able to extract DNA from a fragment of a bone. So this is a bone from a pinky finger, and this was found in a Siberian cave known as the Niza cave. And when the same team of researchers in Leipzig extracted DNA from this bone, they found it belonged to a separate group, a group that was similar genetically to the Neanderthals, but still distinct. They have split it also from the modern human lineage, maybe around 500,000 years ago. They were also not, their genetic diversity was also not shared with the humans, at least sorry, let me rephrase that. So they were not genetically modern human, they were also not genetically Neanderthal, but their DNA survives in present-day people. So this is a new group now that is solely classified from the DNA extracted from a small fragment of a bone. These discoveries were so small in the field that they led to the Nobel Prize in Medicine attributed to Svante Pabo, the person who led these discoveries, in the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2022 for his discoveries concerning the genomes of extinct, mind you, we're still calling them extinct, hominins and human evolution. Now, I was lucky enough to witness a lot of this as a student. And what always bothered me, in the beginning, there were the questions, was who are these people? Who are the Denisovans? Now we have a genome, we have a genetic profile of a population that we're calling a separate species, and we don't know how do they look like in the fossil record? How do they compare to the other pre-existing forms that were existing in the fossil record? So this is what I have devoted my research in the last years to. First in the University of Adelaide and now at the Australian National University. My boss is here, so I gotta be careful. And so what we've been able to show is that the ancestors of present-day people, as humans spread and colonize the rest of the world, The ancestors of present-day people share DNA from Neanderthals and from Denisovans. And what we have sort of added to this is that this Denisovan contribution happened not once, but multiple times. At least this is what our best models tell us. And it happened multiple times in a specific place, in island Southeast Asia. Mind you, the Denisovan bone, the fragment of the finger, was found in Siberia. The highest Denisovan DNA and our model's best predictions for how many events occur, or multiple events occurring, is here in island Southeast Asia. That's thousands of kilometers away from where they were found. Now, this is a very interesting region, and I'm showing you here a reconstruction of the land with sea level, with lower sea levels around 50,000 years ago. That's when modern humans first estimated to have arrived in the region. So you could walk 50,000 years ago from the Middle East without crossing any sea all the way to Borneo. But once you're in Borneo, you couldn't cross to Sulawesi, the Philippines, or the Lesser Sunda Islands. And that's because one of the world's biggest biogeographical barrier for the spread of terrestrial fauna is found in this region. It's called the Wallace's Line, and it has effectively separated the sort of continental shelf of Asia to the west from the islands of Indonesia to the east, and Australia and New Guinea. This has been in place for 50 million years ago and has effectively separated the diversification of marsupial mammals from placental mammals. That's why you have kangaroos, wallabies, and koalas in Australia, but not anywhere else. This is because they can't cross. If you try and row with a boat from, and this is in very close islands, but if you try and row, this is open ocean. If you try to row from Bali to Lombok, you might end up in Antarctica. However, humans have made it, or groups of humans. And we know this because the fossil record of the region is one of the richest in the world. We know that human groups lived in these islands east of Wallace's Line for at least 700,000 years. We also know that Homo erectus inhabited the islands immediately adjacent to the west, Java, for at least 1.8 million years. And just so you understand how recent all these discoveries are, in 2019, in 2005 and in 2019, 2 new species or new groups of humans were detected in these islands. Homo floresiensis in the island of Flores and Homo luzonensis in the Philippines. Now, that of course raised questions. What is the relationship again between these fossil groups and the humans? The main hypothesis is that they are really divergent groups. They are related to Homo erectus. They have nothing to do with the Neanderthals. They have nothing to do with the Denisovans. They are old. So what our group did is that we surveyed hundreds of the genetic profile of hundreds of people living in this area of the world and across the rest of the world. And we asked how much Denisovan ancestry do they have? So we sort of replicated previous findings as well. And we see that this is the highest proportion of Denisovan ancestry of anywhere in the world. And then we had a difficulty. We couldn't yet extract DNA from any of these fossils because these are tropical areas. Preservation is very, very difficult. So we don't know what genetically what they are genetically. Only again, we're tied with morphology. But what we did is that we took insights from population genetics theory. So we used mathematical models and we asked if really old divergent groups mixed with the ancestors of present day people in these islands, what would be the signatures like? And can we find them? And the answer is that we can't. We can't find any evidence without, of course, directly looking at their DNA, but at least estimating, we can't find any evidence of contributions from older groups to the ancestors of present-day people. So now we have a group in Siberia that contributed genetically to people in island Southeast Asia and Australia. We have fossil groups for which we don't know the DNA, but they are in the right place at the right time. And so what our work has been able to pose using this sort of conflation of disciplines and knowledge to try and reconfigure the questions. And so at this stage, we're left with, where are they? They have to be somewhere. Are we about to find them in island Southeast Asia? Or are these fossils in island Southeast Asia have to be rethought and their divergence to humans rethought in light of genetic findings? And so this is an example of how highly disciplinary work can also sort of help reconfiguring knowledge in other disciplines, as others have written about. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John, for this fascinating talk. I think we still have a few minutes to discuss these topics, but I would like to start with the. If you want to start, because I think João had a few questions or not to the test, or no. No.
Well, I would first like, yeah,
So, does any- Yeah.
I would like to congratulate your home. Because after we have listed some cases where interdisciplinarity was difficult to find, which it was even considered as an utopia. Now we see in this special case that it is possible. But it needs study. It needs people to know the knowledge of each other, to learn. If you want to make interdisciplinarity, you have to learn what the others have already learned. And so I am very happy to see that you are dealing with a project which is interdisciplinary and which reaches interdisciplinarity in order to go further. That is the main objective of the science. Even if it is difficult, it is worthwhile. It is something that science today cannot afford. And so I'm very happy with your lesson.
thank you, thank you.
It's collaborative in the topic too. Yeah, to Manuel and Jose.
Well, I mean, it's actually it's actually a follow-up from Olga's question, because really what we had here, and that was just of the session to talk about heterogeneities, and we're thinking about different paradigms of knowledge. We are kind of contrasting science in the natural sciences and humanistic knowledge, artistic knowledge. And I'm thinking, when I think about different paradigms, it just seems also that what we're talking about is what validates knowledge in these different areas of knowledge. And I'm thinking reproducibility is an issue in the natural sciences, even though you bring us an example that there is only one sample, and you launch an entire theory. And I'm thinking about how in humanities, and especially in the arts, aspects of singularity and reproducibility are required. And it just seems to me that at times it's really difficult. And you also talked about forms of knowledge that are not formal, informal, formal forms of knowledge, in which common knowledge or intuition seems to be quite valid. And so my question is a little bit for you, and it's really for all of us, to think about maybe it's an utopia to integrate these different types of knowledge, or how does one go about articulating in a formal setting or a research center or whatever. But it just seems to me that it's one of the big challenges. Basically, just wondering if you have ideas to share.
You think about this stuff.
Yes, yeah, I think it's delicious.
If I could say something, because I fully agree with João when he says in the beginning there were questions, and he is absolutely right. I didn't say in the beginning there were disciplines. I said in the beginning we have disciplines. If we look to the line of time, in the beginning there were questions, but somewhere in time we built disciplines, and now we face disciplines, and many times they constitute an obstacle. That is, I could add to my in the beginning we have disciplines, and we have the totality. we are condemned to do interdisciplinary work. If we have to grasp the full connections existing in the real world. But the fact is that we face disciplines. We work within disciplines. And my work on interdisciplinarity has been how to challenge these obstacles. And this leads me to the word utopia. Why I call interdisciplinarity an utopia? It's not a utopia, the real work we do in terms of interdisciplinarity. We have a path. We have to walk, and this walk is very real. But our aim of full knowledge, the full domain of the totality, this is for me a utopia. Why is it a utopia? Because we face many challenges, many of them we may overcome them, but there is one we cannot face, we cannot overcome, which is our cognitive limitations. We have to divide work. We have to somehow split the efforts we are doing. Some people must do something and the others should do other things. Because we cannot make all the things that we need. So we must have some division of labor. And this division of labor is the main obstacle. Let me call it an epistemological obstacle that prevents the reaching of an aim which is the full domain of the totality. So this is how I see the idea of utopia. Utopia does not mean that it's unreachable. I know that this is the meaning of utopia, but I take this in two ways: the aim and the walking to that aim. And when I say interdisciplinarity is an utopia, is the end, not the work we are trying to do every day in terms of rebuilding sciences. And if this is the case, that if in the, not in the beginning, but if we now have disciplines, we have somehow to reconfigure the sciences we have. And this is my approach to the problem of interdisciplinarity.
If I could just add something to that in relation to different forms of knowledge that I was talking about, but also just to pick up on the earlier question about the need to learn each other's knowledge. I think that's incredibly challenging in an environment in which disciplines have become more and more specialized. I think it's a wonderful aim. To the extent that we're able to do that, we must do that. We must understand the language that each other is using it and try to understand the concepts and the background. But the kind of cases that Georgina was talking about, there is a real limitation that you cannot go back and be trained for 40 years as a computer scientist. The way through that, and I would agree, is collaboration. I think that has to be the only potential way forward. But to come back to sort of different forms of knowledge, one of the projects that we're supporting at Crash is a project looking into indigenous justice systems in Colombia. And this is very challenging to think about how do you bring together indigenous knowledge within sort of more national systems of law, etc. And I think one of the inspirations for me in thinking about how do we actually make this work is to look in areas of the world where this is already happening. Those kinds of collaborations across really tricky boundaries is already taking place. For example, there's an indigenous university in Colombia that is exploring these and other issues. And I think that actually in formerly colonized countries and regions of the world, there are already practices of trying to combine these knowledge in new and interesting ways. Rising public universities, for example, that's I think where we can take models and inspiration for how these things could work better.
Yeah. Thanks. I appreciate Victoria's collaboration we have. Because yeah, the disciplines are really a 19th century. We always had people asking questions. We had Shakespeare, who drew from different discourses. We had Leonardo da Vinci, who united the arts and sciences. The word biology did not exist until I think 1902. So, and psychology developed out of the military intelligence. Right. So I think the notion of disciplinarity and also indigenous knowledge has always been holistic. I think the concept of disciplinarity really goes along with the project modernity. And when you get the rise of postmodernism, you get the rise of complex problems. That's where we're finding its limitations. And I do think, disciplinarity has issues now because we are seeing more and more complex issues. I mean, the question that the project that you're working on, for me, you left us with a cliffhanger.
It is what it is.
No,
So you would give me more funding. That's exactly. No, but this, I mean, I guess, so I'll just add very quickly to this. So maybe start with that note. I have this, sort of urgency to have more questions. So I'll always leave you on a cliffhanger. So even if I find hopefully the answer to this one, I'll try to find a new interesting one. Because I'm not sure if I should say this in public. I'll say it anyway. I'm actually more interested in the questions than necessarily the answers. Anyway, but to go back to the paradigms and the conceptualization of problems and how different perspectives can sort of change and transform objects, complex objects. This is, sort of something that I've been forced to think about a lot lately. And it's a very practical worry, intellectual worry, which is how can specialized disciplinary knowledge in my discipline, in evolutionary biology, for example, and how that is translated into the world. How views, sometimes simplified views of how evolutionary biology works, and how is that translated? We have pretty bad examples in the 20th century of how abusive interpretations of evolutionary biology can have drastic consequences for the world and society. So I'm interested in that. And I'm interested because it's not necessarily that we need to conceive a conflict between ways of conceptualization. I think is that, so subjectivity is something we sort of struggle with. We want to look at an objective reality that it's there, it's tangible, it's measurable, and it's reproducible. This is what we're going to do in the natural science. So we're not going to change that, but we can frame the question slightly different. We can think about the consequences of the science. We can see how that bridges and branches off, and that's what I'm interested in as well, right? And how can I bring my perspective into the social sciences or humanities, however the division is these days. Anyway, that was just it.
So well, and then you go to that, and then we will talk in the lunchtime. Wow.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the different takes on the disciplinarity of the practice, the arts, and social sciences. My question is related to one concept that was in one of the slides by Eva, the concept of interparadigmatic pluralism. So we're trying to claim that somehow sciences already have some kind of openness in themselves, in the sense that the core elements of different disciplines are always disputed because there are different paradigms, different theories, and the way disciplines define their core concepts, their methodologies, their epistemology are always part of the scientific social process of definition. So then you were asking what are the limits of pluralism? What are they? So what kind of I would say what kind of self-reflective critical elements in each discipline is necessary to understand the limits of in some theory, in some epistemology. Because I think Georgina Born in her talk showed different approaches to interdisciplinarity in relation with computer science or between social sciences and humanities and the arts. But I wonder if this pluralism cannot be a question of pick and choose. It must have some kind of validation, some kind. So the way you build your interdisciplinary system has to have some kind of process of validation. And what are these limits?
I really don't know. This is perhaps the issue I'm facing now, to which I don't have an answer. That is, I see a problem when we look to, for example, economics is my own discipline. Economics is a multi-paradigm discipline. We have conflicting views, approaches within economics. And what I find when we try to discuss making collaborations between different, among different disciplines, sometimes the work we try to do is incoherent, it's inconsistent, because we are trying to put together things that are completely inconsistent. They mean different views on the real world. That is, we have incompatible ontologies in place. So we must face this problem. But at the same time, I recognize that we have a difficulty when I say that perhaps a sociologist, a political scientist, an economist must work together if they share the same ontological and epistemological view. But if this is the case, in a certain sense, we prevent a pluralist approach to knowledge. And that's why I say, I don't know the answer, because I'm in between these two poles. That is, I need coherence, I need consistency, but at the same time, we have to break the barriers that we have with different conflicting paradigms. And the fact is that they are incommensurable. And I don't know how to deal with this. This is, at this point in time, I'm reflecting precisely on that issue, and I don't know the answer. Sorry.
I have a comment and then a question. The comment follows on beautifully because you said that will collapse those, but I completely don't agree, and you yourself said everything is in motion. It's a reconfiguration. The fact that sociology, social economics, and some aspects of the political theory could in fact work very, very well together. It's just a reconfiguration. It means that, the fact that sociology and anthropology have enormous amount in common, and they still want to put their stakes down in their hand. It's something that I don't want. But also, you mentioned the different thing you meant, which was the internal conflict, internal difference within this. To comment on that, which is that itself takes different forms and has different kind of motives out of it. So let me take anthropology. I'm sorry, everyone. Dive in anthropology and dive. So anthropology is kind of stuck, in my opinion, It has its internal physical, social, linguistic. But in some weird way, when I observe those social anthropology, cultural anthropology, is, I call it involution. It's always turning problems back into its existing conceptual space. For some reason, they are so anxious and defensive that unless you can make it anthropological, you can't think about it. So there's this kind of all this closure, this folding back into the middle. And it kind of makes it stuck. They're so worried about this that they can't turn out. And one wonders why. Particularly in the deep learning. How can you defend a discipline that was originally defined on the basis of the colonial relationship? I go, yeah, you contrast that with music. Music disciplines in the last 20 years have changed, and they've changed because of external pressures of the music. Oh my goodness, lots of people find this stuff aesthetically valuable. And other the rise of sound studies, maybe music object has to be thought in relation to its sound, voice, and so on. So for some reason, music studies is evolving in anxious ways, but still evolving. Anthropology, I would say that let's just stand back and remember that music, like all the arts, is much more under attack for its disciplinary institutional status than anthropology and anthropology is grand ancient discipline. So we also have to be concerned with the status of disciplines and their funding possibilities. And we're into immediately the politics. And I don't think we can take it away. So I just wanted to comment on this kind of the different kind of, mobilities, internal mobilities, and the boundary, permeable boundaries we talk about, which are so markedly different. We just take a moment to think about what's happening. And this is the fact that this society is changing fast, possibly too fast. It's so much to do with its defining political and public philosophy. And I'm afraid, but it still has effects of the nature of physical knowledge. Finally, a question to Joao, which is really thrown up by your lovely talk. It's in a way a very simple one. You took us on this incredible journey, ranging across these huge disciplinary spaces and a very capacious and fast, rapid. And it makes one ask, how much of this journey is to do with collaboration and how much to do with what we call in our book, because it really matters, interdisciplinarity in one person. That is, you yourself and your capacity to read into these different fields, do some incredible tricks here in the head, and come up with this extraordinary set of evolving problems. And I just think that you mentioned yourself that particular kinds of subjectivity, and some of us are a bit like that in my own, we just can't stop asking questions, looking outside, and we try to help to change the boundaries. Could you speak to that?
Well, I can certainly try. This is definitely not a one-person interdisciplinarity for sure, but it is a reflection on whether my discipline could offer answers or even new questions by gathering and looking at data from different disciplines. But it requires talks, and I can give you an example. So when we, in that paper that I was mentioning at the end, so the conclusion is that there is a cliffhanger, there's an open question. So are these fossils Denisovans? Have we found them? Or are we yet to find them? And if you read the paper, both hypotheses are given equal support. And I was actually trying to propose the editors in Nature to say author X, Y, and Z think this is more likely. Authors A, B, and C completely disagree. I think that would be great. This is not how things usually go. But what I can tell that is sort of my own volition, if you will, or my own conception, is a resistance, even if there's like someone who has like big weight in the field. If I'm not convinced by the argument, I will argue back. And I've been fortunate to work with people who are understanding of that, but I'm also fortunate because I can poke into, I wouldn't call it dogmatic, but sort of like established models of human evolution, because I'm not an archaeologist. That is helping me because I can now suddenly poke, because the geneticists say, well, that's totally fair. And the archaeologist is like, well, he has no clue, he's a geneticist. So, but this is sort of leading the discussion, I hope, and I'm guessing this discussion, and I mean, the project has been now since then funded by the Australian Research Council. And so we're hoping that this talk helps reframing the question, but you can't do it. I don't think I could do it alone for sure. What was the follow-up? That was it.
Okay, thank you so much. Just some practical information. We are a bit delayed, so the human section will start at 2:15, so that we have time to have lunch and talking about these amazing topics. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
That should do the TV series, you know, like.
It's